We are now starting our event. We're starting the Oscar Salas partnership between the University of São Paulo through the Institute of Advanced Studies and the CGI.br, represented by its executive branch, NIC.br. My name is Guilherme Ariplonsky. I manage IEA, Institute of Advanced Studies. It is a pleasure to lead this activity today that will focus on a specific topic that I'm sure you are familiar with. But the basis of this topic is addressing innovation. I think innovation is at the core of this topic. The resistance, sometimes some obscure aspects of innovation, and all of that applied to such an important area to our existence as a society, journalism. I'm not going to introduce each of the speakers right now. Professor Eugenio Bucci, the coordinator of this discipline at IEA, is going to do that. Luis Fernando Martins Castro is the academic coordinator representing CGI. And I'd also like to thank him for this partnership, Lazar and Professor Getchko. They are our partners. Professor Roseli, who's also participating in another event and is going to join us soon, so that we could begin this discipline that we are launching in this great event. I would also like to thank two people in special. First, I would like to thank journalist Rodrigo Mesquita for accepting the invitation to participate in this first activity. And also, I would like to thank him for such an important text that he shared at the Institute's website with us. I'd also like to say that I believe that your ancestor, Júlio de Mesquita Filho, would be glad with this meeting. The University of São Paulo is the result of an effort in which Júlio de Mesquita Filho, who used to own the Estado de São Paulo newspaper, had his role was crucial with Fernando de Azevedo, the educator. I think it's also a symbolic fact that we are bringing you to this meeting, not only because of your own merits and because of the light that you're going to shed on us during this discussion, but also because of the symbolism of the presence of the Mesquita family as part of the University of São Paulo's DNA. I would like to thank Professor Valder Bender for MIT. MIT is an icon institution in innovation across the world. It is a benchmark to everyone. MIT Media Lab is also a very strong reference to all of us as an innovative, creative space that has helped building the world the way we know it. So it's a special joy to have Professor Walter Bender with us today. We know how important MIT Media Lab had in this report that we had and that we will hear from Professor Mesquita. So on behalf of the University of São Paulo, I would like to thank CGI-BR, NIC-BR, and everyone who will participate today. And I turn over to our academic coordinator, Professor Eugenio Bucci.
Muito bom dia.
Good
Bom
morning.
dia, professor Ari Plonsky,
Good
que é
morning,
nosso
Professor Ari
diretor e nosso
Plonsky,
líder no Instituto de
our
Estudos
director and our
Avançados.
leader in the Institute of
Eu
Advanced
agradeço
Studies,
braços abertos
IEA.
cada uma das pessoas que neste
I
momento nos
thank you,
acompanham. Este é um
and I
evento
thank everyone
essencial,
who is
importante para
participating in
nós,
this
é a
event, a
inauguração
very
das
crucial
atividades,
event
como
to
disse o
all of us,
professor Ari,
the opening of
da
this new
Cátedra Oscar
activities of the
Sala,
discipline Oscar
uma
Sala,
parceria entre o Instituto de
a
Estudos Avançados da
partnership
USP e o
between IEA
NIC-BR
from
do
the University of
CGI.
BR and Nick BR and
Agradeço
CGI.
também
And I'd
a
also like to thank the
participação do
participation
nosso palestrante de hoje, o
of
jornalista
our
Rodrigo
speaker today,
Mesquita,
journalist
que
Rodrigo
nos
Mesquita.
dá uma honra muito
It is an
grande,
honor to have
sobretudo
him with us
porque
today,
não são comuns
especially because
palestras
it is
do
not
Rodrigo.
common
Nós vamos
to
ter aqui
listen to Rodrigo
momento
Mesquita giving a talk.
realmente especial.
It's a
É uma
special
das
opportunity.
carreiras de mais proeminência
It
quando
is
nós
one of the
falamos
most
sobre
prominent
a
careers
aproximação
when
entre
we talk
tecnologia
about
e jornalismo.
getting
Quero
journalism
agradecer
and
ao
technology
Demigéticos, quero
closer. I
agradecer
would
ao
also like to
professor
thank Demi
Walter
Getchko,
Bender, quero
Professor Walter Bender,
agradecer a minha
and
querida Bianca Santana,
Bianca
que
Santana,
precisou fazer um certo contorcionismo de
who
agenda para
needed
estar
to
conosco. Muito
juggle
obrigado,
her
Bianca. E o
commitments to be here
jornalista
with us
Caio
today.
Túlio
I'd
Costa,
also like to
que
thank
é
journalist Caio
uma
Tulio Costa,
referência
who
no
is a
tema que
reference
discutiremos hoje.
in the
Eu
topic that
não
we are
farei a
going to discuss today.
apresentação
I am
de
not
todos,
going to
porque eu vou
introduce
passar
each
a
one of
palavra
you because
imediatamente
now I will turn over
ao
to
Carlos Eduardo
Carlos
Lins da
Eduardo
Silva,
Lins da
que
Silva,
vai fazer
who
a
will
condução e a moderação dos
be the
debates,
moderator of the
convidando os
debates,
oradores
and he's
a
going to
se
be the person who
manifestarem
will turn over to
quando
the
ele fará
speakers at proper
breves
time,
apresentações
and
de
he's
cada um.
also
Eu
going
queria
to
apenas
make brief
fazer
introductions of
uma
each one of our
rapidíssima
speakers.
apresentação
I just
do
wanted to
Carlos
make this
Eduardo
very
Lins da
brief
Silva.
introduction of Carlos
É dos
Eduardo Lins da
jornalistas
Silva.
mais
He is one of the
experientes
most
e com
experienced
mais
journalists
vivências teóricas e
and experienced
práticas
both in theoretical
da
and
nossa
practical
geração.
aspects
O
of
Carlos
our
Eduardo é
generation.
professor
Carlos
livre-docente, deu
Eduardo
aulas
is
na
a
ECA,
professor
foi
and
correspondente em
he
Washington,
was a
estudou
correspondent in
nos Estados
Washington.
Unidos, na
He
Universidade
studied in the
Estadual
US
de
at
Michigan,
the State University of Michigan.
foi secretário de redação da Folha
He
de São
was the
Paulo,
secretary of the
conduziu ao
newsroom of
lado do
Folha de
Caio
São
Túlio
Paulo, and
a
together with
implantação
Caio
da
Tulio,
reforma da Folha de
he
São
led the
Paulo, que
implementation of
foi
a
de uma
major
influência
reform in the Folha de São
permanente na
Paulo,
imprensa
and that
brasileira.
meant
Dessa
a permanent
experiência, o Carlos
influence in
Eduardo
Brazilian
organizou
press.
e publicou
Carlos
o livro
Eduardo
dele,
organized and published a
Mil
book
Dias, que é um
called
clássico na
Mil
literatura
Dias or
sobre
A
jornalismo no
Thousand Days,
Brasil.
which
Ele é
is a
autor
classic about
também
journalism in Brazil.
de um
He
outro
also
livro
authored
fundamental, Muito Além do
another
Jardim Botânico,
seminal
em que,
book,
através dos estudos da
Muito Além do
recepção,
Jardim
ele
Botânico, Way
demonstra a
Beyond
autonomia do
Botanical Garden,
espectador em
that
relação às
shows the
supostas
autonomy of
doutrinações dos meios de
spectators
comunicação. É um estudo
when faced the
surpreendente que se tornou
alleged
um clássico.
doctrination of the
É
media.
autor
This
de
is a
outros
classical
vários
study.
livros. Eu gosto
And he
muito de O
also
Adiantado da
is also the
Hora,
author
onde
of
ele
many
explora
other
as
books.
influências da cultura
Adiantado da
jornalística
Hora is
americana no
when
Brasil.
he
Carlos
explored the
Eduardo
influences of American
também
journalism
foi
in
um dos
Brazil. Carlos
diretores,
Eduardo was
condutores do
also one of
projeto
the
Valor
directors and
Econômico, ao
leaders of the
lado de
Valor
Celso
Econômico
Pinto, que
project, together with
fez a
Celso Pinto.
implantação, ao lado de Celso Pinto, deste
Together with
jornal
Mr.
no
Pinto, he
Brasil.
implemented the Valor Econômico
E
newspaper,
hoje ele é professor do INSPER
focused on
e
finance
é
in Brazil. He teaches at
assessor
INSPER
da
University
FAPESP.
today,
É
and he
uma
is an
honra muito
assistant
grande
to
para nós
FAPESP, the funding
termos
agency
o
of the
Carlos
state of São
Eduardo
Paulo. It is
Lins
an
da
honor
Silva
to have
a
Carlos
função
Eduardo
de
Lins da Silva
moderação
with
do
us as
debate de
our
hoje. Carlos
moderator
Eduardo,
of today's debate.
muito obrigado
So,
por
Carlos
tudo.
Eduardo,
A
thank you
palavra é
very
sua.
much for everything, and I turn
Muito
over to
obrigado,
you now.
Eugênio. Muito
Thank you,
obrigado
Eugênio.
pelas palavras tão
Thank you
generosas.
for your
Eu vou
generous
ter
words.
aqui uma função muito desagradável hoje, que vai
My
ser de
role
tentar
is not so
controlar o tempo.
pleasant
Nós temos
because I'll have to be the
pessoas muito
timekeeper.
brilhantes que
We
têm
have
muito a
brilliant
dizer
people
e
with us. They have
gostaríamos de
so
poder
much to share with
ouvi-las
us,
a cada
and
uma
I wish
durante
I
o máximo
could
de tempo possível, mas
listen to each one of
infelizmente
them for
o
as long as I
relógio
could,
corre.
but
Então eu vou fazer
unfortunately we
aquela
have time
função chata
restrictions.
dos
So
moderadores de
I'll
debates
be one of
ficar
those
quando o tempo
moderators
se
and had
esgotar
this
de cada dos
unfortunate
oradores,
task of
lembrando
being
que o
the
tempo se esgotou,
timekeeper and
e
reminding
inclusive
speakers
para
that
que
the time
possa
is
haver
up.
alguma
And
possibilidade
also
de
because so
que
that we can
recebamos
also leave
perguntas e
some possibility
contribuições
of
do
opening to
público.
questions
Quem
and to
quiser
input from the
enviar
audience.
perguntas,
If you
mande
want
para
to send questions, please send it to
iea@usp.br ou pelo chat do YouTube.
iea@usp.br or
Eu
through
vou então
the
ser muito rápido nas
chat on
apresentações
YouTube.
e passar a
I'm going to
palavra
be
para cada
brief
dos
on my
oradores. O
introductions
primeiro,
and I will
o
turn
jornalista
over
Rodrigo
to
Mesquita,
each one of
uma
the speakers.
pessoa
Rodrigo
que
Mesquita, the
todos
first one, a
sabemos tem a
journalist
maior
that you are
importância
also
nessa
familiar
área de
with. He's of
tecnologia
crucial
digital e
importance
prática do
in digital
jornalismo.
technology
Participou
and
de
practice
dois
of
dos mais
journalism.
bonitos
He
projetos de jornalismo no
participated
Brasil,
on two
o
of the
Jornal
most
da
beautiful
Tarde e a
projects,
Agência Estado,
Jornal da Tarde
Impressões de
and
Grande
Agência Estado
Relevo. Fez
newspapers,
história na
and
Universidade de
he
São
also
Paulo
made history
e
at the
participou
University of
durante
São
muito
Paulo.
tempo
He
do
participated for
MIT
quite
Media
some
Lab.
time of the
Passo
MIT
então a
Media
palavra
Lab.
para o
So
Rodrigo.
now I turn
Rodrigo, se
over
você
to
puder, em
Rodrigo
20,
Mesquita.
25, no máximo
Oh,
30
if you
minutos,
could, in
expor
20,
o
25, 30
conteúdo
minutes
principal
tops.
das suas ideias, depois você vai ter mais tempo de falar durante os debates e após a participação dos demais oradores. Passo então a palavra ao Rodrigo,
Now I
agradecendo mais
turn
uma
over
vez a
to
ele
Rodrigo
pela
and
sua
thank him
disponibilidade de estar
once
aqui.
again for his availability to be here with us. Rodrigo, your mic.
Rodrigo,
Okay,
acho que
now
você
you're
precisa
unmuted.
tirar o mudo. Rodrigo?
Está no mudo ainda. Agora sim.
Okay, now he's unmuted. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here. I would like to thank the Institute of Advanced Studies of the University of São Paulo and NIC-BR for the opportunity that they have given me. I'd like to thank Eugenio and Carlos Eduardo. This meeting came from a talk that we had, the three of us. First, I would like us to suggest that we prioritize three main topics for our debate. First, is the social media platforms, tools like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. So are they a tool or a process? Second, what is the responsibility of media techs in the media environment? And third, because of the intense polarization we have in the civic debate today, is it a consequence of the fact that each one of us is at the center of the process, or at least in part because of the emissions of the old and new players of the new agora, the new arena in society? Having said that, just share my screen with you. So this is the topic at hand. I don't believe that internet is a new media of communication. It's a new infrastructure that deeply affects all society processes, social processes, political, economic processes, creating a new cognitive reality. New generation think differently from us. Regarding media, internet has promoted the combination of editing and printing, TV, and radio broadcasting with computing and telecom, accelerating the flow of information to society and engaging the audience in such a way that it annuls McLuhan's axiom, the media is the message, and created a new axiom, narrative is the message. In this context, we have to have it clear that big techs are becoming utilitarians for democracy. These companies control the social infrastructure we use for communication and organization, and control over this infrastructure concentrates the economic, social, and political power. The press, for several reasons that we are not going to dwell into here, seem to ignore this fact. And also the fact that everything in society, with what is good and what is bad about it, is on the internet discussing its past, present, and future on a daily basis, for good or for bad. It poorly covers the evolution of the network, the responsibility of big techs in the process, and confounds social media, which is a process that has always existed, with the tools or platforms. Polarization of the contemporary society in this time of change is a consequence of this destructuring of the old media ecosystem and the birth of a new, the old ecosystem, the old media ecosystem was broadcast from 1 point to 1,000 points without any point of return, while this new ecosystem is a network ecosystem. Each one of us is at the center of of this system. This is an image of my great grandfather, Julio Mesquita. He was a businessman. He was the son of a Portuguese immigrant who came to Brazil to find a new life. He had to choose a son who was going to go to school, and he chose Julio de Mesquita, who was brilliant. And even at the beginning, he was a literate student at the age of 6. He was the student of Pestana, one of the leaders of the Paulista Republican Party. He fought for the abolishment of slavery and for the proclamation of the Republic. He was a mentor to him. So when he joined the law school when he was 15 and graduated, and then went back to his city of Campinas, where he was a lawyer and collaborated with local newspapers. He was also a councilman with a record number of votes. He was a radical political leader. He was part of a group that was almost like a guerrilla group. He was the Luis Gama was the leader of that group. He was a mulatto, a son of slaves who organized this, who organized quilombos in Santos. Not long after the abolition of slavery, he was taken to Sao Paulo. It was just a part of the Republican Party. Jorge Caldeira published a book, Julio Mesquita and His Time, should be the time of Julio Mesquita, and more than his history per se, or the transformation of a state in the first Brazilian modern newspaper that was not connected to any parties, and a newspaper that would not sell the interests of one given party at that time. Right before the slavery was abolished and we had a republic here instead of a kingdom. Pestana left this newspaper right after that. He joined politics, and his role was to write or to help writing the first constitution of the new republic. Julio Mesquita took over the newspaper at that time. They used to sell 4,000 copies a day, and it just targeted the elite. It did not have a connection with the general audience or with engaging the community. It was getting part or giving a contribution so that we could move on. When he died in 1927, the newspaper sold 65,000 copies. Today, usually newspapers sell 90,000 copies. The average time that a user stays on newspapers online is very short, like a minute or so, while in social media, of course, people spend a much longer time, like 15 or 20 minutes in each occasion. In this new mediatic environment, there are a lot of dysfunctions. At the end of his life, Mesquita said that he never dared believing that he had the right or the duty of building a public opinion. Everything he did in his life was to probe the public's opinion and just let himself be taken by the streams that he felt were the right ones. He was a councilman, he was a state representative, but he has always shared the two roles. And as he matured, of course, there was this fight between progressive and more conservative Republicans. He detached from the political activities because he never confounded in his work one thing and the other, and he turned Estado de São Paulo newspaper in the first largest newspaper that actually brought the audience into that newspaper.
So that's the view of this community. The state of São Paulo was a modern state. Valdeira's book has to do with the explosion of capitalism in São Paulo. This was a virtuous process that distributed a lot of wealth. Julio Mesquita led campaigns. He led important campaigns in the newspaper about civility, and Rui Barbosa with the Republicans and Democrats and the more progressive politicians who wanted democracy to be in place to generate a government that would lead to impact on the civil society to meet the society's expectations, actually. At the time, participation was very limited to a very small number of people. Actually, those in power were the ones who defined who was going to replace them. There was a lot of fraud. They lost this battle, and that's why, or that's probably why, our political process is as it is today. So broken, truncated. Of course, Julio Mesquita played a very important role in my education. I am the son of Rui Mesquita and the grandson of Julio Mesquita. I respect them both a lot. And of course, they were very important in my education and upbringing. Those who gave the basis of the current status was Julio Mesquita. I started my professional career as a journalist at Jornal da Tarde when I was 23 years old. I did everything there. I started as a telegram screener. I was a copy desk. I was a reporter, editor. When I left Jornal da Tarde in 88, I was working with editing, and the newspaper was brilliant in the way it covered the city, in the coverage of cultural life. And also, they have different sections like the culture section. I started working there along with a generation who started at 17 years of age. That was a very important part of my career. In 88, I left the newspaper, started working at the Estado group, trying to allocate the captation structure of the newspaper. We had correspondents scattered throughout the different capital cities with a very strong concentration in Sao Paulo and over 3,000 journalists. This network was created at the times of my grandfather, and it was exactly that network that led to the transformation of the newspaper into what it is now. When he died in 77, he had a lot of achievements. among the different reforms, he didn't allow anybody to sign. The newspaper belonged to the public. He created this process. And then I started working for the Agência Estado. I started working there to work with information technology, communication, trying to have this structure work for us so that we could create products for other segments and not only the newspaper. Investments that started in the 40s. At the late 40s, actually, it was stabilized, and then we had a media production, not only television and radio, but we have grocery stores and a lot of other things involved. That was a slow process. In the 80s, with the ability to have more income generation and top journalists was no longer there. And what we had to do was to restructure our network so that it would help us and be able to work or to serve other markets. In 88, we worked during ECHO 92. We reached over 3,000 points with that network. It was concentrated at universities with knowledge structures. These were experimental things we did. And then we later started with a broadcast done in real time on financial matters. So, in addition to working with the stock market, both the Brazilian stock market and abroad, we also had services where we had technical monitoring of the market on a daily basis and all of the news that would had an impact on the financial market. For you to have an idea, in a single day, we distributed more information than we did in a year, both in terms of editing and special information. At that time, I proposed that we were affiliated to the Media Lab. Internet was coming about. It was commercially accepted in 95. That's when we started using it. Of course, it was not like what it is today. We didn't have the same kind of band, the availability of the cloud. The Media Lab was the Media and Technology Lab. It played a very important role in the development of the internet as a process, not only for journalism, but we had programs for the software sector, hardware, uh, telephone system operators. It was a huge lab. It was a huge technology lab. We were all looking forward. I worked with the Media Lab from 92 to 2006. I started out as a representative of Grupo Estado, and then in 92, when I left the company, they allowed me to work as an affiliated researcher so that I could keep on working with them. Then there was another program led by Walter, who is here with us. And then it was turned into information organizer and then a city program. I witnessed the beginning of a crisis. I do believe that right now journalism is facing a crisis. We're trying to review different actions, but they had a very arrogant attitude. They did not want to understand what it meant for you. not to work with the broadcasting where you had the control of the public and a lot of entry barriers, to work in the network where each and every one of us in the core is in the core of the process. We wanted Media Lab to provide outcomes, but what it did was that it helped us understand where we were headed to. It was essential for Agência Estado to participate in this process. At that time, we had a revenue of 400,000 real. When I left in 92, it was 100 million with a return rate of almost 30%. So it's a very important company for Grupo Estado. So we had this discussion now regarding communication. What you read here is a first definition of what news means. This is a definition given by Walter Bender. News do not change the world, but they provide new intelligence and the tools with which we can explore it. It is a source of shared models about the world. They help us navigate. News open the doors for participation. This is an ongoing discussion in the Media Lab. My great grandfather, in the beginning of the past century, did with the resources available in São Paulo. São Paulo was a city with less than 100,000 inhabitants. When he died, it was a 500 or 600,000 inhabitant city. The processes at the time enabled you to, in fact, monitor that community, to have a good idea of all of the problems that would affect it, and also that you could help the society to debate, to discuss. Journalists do not lighten the world, but they are intermediate stakeholders. The public always wanted it. They don't want ready answers. They want to participate actively. They want to participate in the formulation of important debates. So, from that time, when the newspapers were more detached from political parties and started working based on this relationship with the communities they were inserted in, gave an opportunity for for the communities to participate and to lead their own processes. Somehow, journalists became an authority and were no longer an intermediate agent. In terms of Agência Estado, the group was professionalized in 2002. I immediately started working with a network. I was associated to a company, a software house that had been created at the Federal University of São Carlos. And then I started working with Agência Estado, thinking that in the future you would not make money based on your ability to distribute information, but more based on your ability to help different sectors of the society and your interests and things like that. In 2002, we started working with local agents in São Paulo. I worked with the beginning of some sectors like the food sector. I never made money, but I learned a lot. We had local networks. We contributed for these arrangements so that we could move on, better understand the internet, so that we could be more active. The early idea was to work with different sectors, with distributors, and then after that, Orkut was launched by Google. So we looked at that and we said, okay, let's create a platform for entrepreneurship. Babydo is the Inca pathway that went from equator to the ocean side, and then a part of the word means grass. So the name of this platform meant new pathways for you and for the society, for small businesses to be able to have a more effective participation in the market. This platform had hundreds of thousands of users. The main community was the coffee community. The National Coffee Confederation was headed by Alberto Portugal. He had been Embrapa's president. When I worked at Agência Estado, I worked closely with Embrapa. That had to do with the financial market. We also created an agribusiness channel called Agro Test. So I started working closely with Embrapa because I needed their information to share with the market. I helped Embrapa to move forward early on and to be prepared for the internet that was emerging back then. Alberto Portugal headed the National Coffee Council, and now we have it within this community. It came to a point where we said we can no longer invest on platforms. The internet had already moved forward, was implemented. We had the cloud available, and we thought we could create these processes using all of these tools. We didn't need to have our own tool. At the time, Alberto Portugal was working for the government of Aécio Neves in the Secretary of Science, Technology, and Education. The state of Minas Gerais has a very important center of technology information. Ivan Moura and Bertier Neto had created Aqua. It is a development company that ended up being bought by Google, and then Bertier is there to this day. It's an important company that works with the Google group. It is actually very relevant in this area. Alberto Portugal called us and he said, some people here want to create a kind of Orkut for the area of communication. So wouldn't you like to create a proposal? So we analyzed it and we ended up creating a process called uh, technology, entrepreneurship, and applied information. Definitely, it was the largest crowdsourcing project in Brazil back in the day. It lasted 3 years. We created a network of agents working with us and always using all of these processes and the processes involved in journalism, such as editing, among others. But what we did had specific goals. These goals were defined by the client. We created a partnership with Google and created a digital information company made available to the state of Minas Gerais. And also at the time, we had 753 municipalities in the state. We normalized the or emails actually for the mayors. And in addition to all of the different environments for planning, development, I'm sorry, of joint information for schools and so on and so forth.
So for mayors, for councilmen, and for public interest organizations of the Minas states, we created that. So we created also also other tools and for the group of Viçosa, for example, that's a city that holds a a big university there, so it's very important for the agribusiness. So there were several specific networks that we built for those groups. A few years after, we also put together a major event where we had Aécio Neves, the governor, the 70 largest bloggers of the time. We put together a whole show. Alexandre Hagen, who used to be the president of Google for Latin America, went there, and Vancef was there too. If you're curious about that, just Google it. Alexandre Hagen, Teia, Teia, and Vancef, and you will see a lot of videos on YouTube that we produced back then. Vancef, after we presented all the results of the projects, he said that he was touched by it. He said, I have never thought that I would see a project that held the essence of internet. Alexandre Hagen took the microphone at that time and said, we need to take this project to the whole world. And after that, I asked Van Saf, or rather, I asked the governor for an audience. And I said, well, let's dwell into that. You're a young governor. Maybe we could have a working group and we could let you know more about the internet. You could be the leader of that. He said he would, but he didn't. The project is running until today, but a network requires management, and that didn't take place. So I made this long introduction to say that what is very peculiar about my professional career, since I was for the first 30 years, I worked in journalism and then I moved to the market and I used the same processes to do what I believe should be the mission of newspapers to contribute so that you can get the engagement of the community where the newspaper is inserted. That's the basis for knowledge. This whole process is not is related to how the information goes today. In this info chart you see on the screen, we have the represented the traditional press marked in one, alternative press marked as number two, and also form opinion makers in number three, and regular users in number four. So these are the ones that um, groups that are built in different platforms in social media, and social media is the only organized social media in Brazil is Bolsonaro's social media. He would never have been elected if he didn't have that network, because it has power of distribution. Newspapers on the internet, since they did not quite understand how it would work and they believed that everything would be great just because of their names. But we know statistically that 70% of the audience today just reaches the newspapers because of the discussions that they are taking part in these groups in social media. People do not read any text in depth, and you have an ideological reading, you have a curious reading, you have an investigative reading. And obviously, the most common type of reading is the WhatsApp reading, the very quick one. And that has a major impact on the process involved in building public opinion. In all these networks we work in, so we work with different groups, with SEBRAE, with Corinthian soccer team, works with agribusiness. Over 10 years working in process of engagement with economic sectors or specific sectors of society. We had a monitoring center to do what Julio Mesquita did in the beginning of last century when São Paulo had 20,000, 40,000 inhabitants. We have a monitoring center in those platforms. Those platforms are integrated in your kind of newsroom. So they it's not exactly the journalist who is monitoring the information on a daily basis. They use other technological resources like algorithms to put together a structure that is connected to their newsroom system. This generates monitoring, analysis processes, curatorship processes, and also this gives inputs to the newsrooms, and that would ultimately lead to products. This is what I consider to be the processes. They reflect the newsroom on itself, but now in a new way that uses technology. Of course, you have curatorship, you map, you filter per topics, you monitor things, but in context, you produce images, you have landing pages, you put this in the network. And in the analysis process, you analyze the information flows. This is where you have more seasoned journalists working on. With that, we have a huge set of potential products. There are theme-based reports, that things that can be used based on subscriptions, and you make more money basically, like in New York Times, just gets more money because of crosswords or cooking section, but they are no longer Manhattan newspaper as it was in the beginning. Now it has a space to go beyond that region. Well, I ask you to please to consider the graphical presentation of this page, but we have theme-based pages. They are alive. You have feeds of information. You can present social media, or maybe a social media that is discussing public transportation in Sao Paulo and its various problems that involves buses, Uber, bicycles. You can also collect everything that has already been published on a given topic to engage the audience in that discussion, and also to bring the journalist perspective because of his analysis enriching. So I believe that the press needs to adapt to a network-based society if it wants to reflect it. So press needs to take over the role of a curator and a monitor of the networks. Neil Ferguson is an American historian. He published this book in 2014, and he analyzed hierarchies and networks. There are 2 or 3 different slides on that work. He makes a metaphor using Fritz Lang's Metropolis movie. There were uprisings in the beginning of the industrialization times, and metropolis represent the control, the power. So that author also discussed different types of networks, including nature-based networks and other types of networks. Also says that Western empires were also maintained because of these networks. The largest telegraphic network uh, that was underwater, for example, but it is also combined with hierarchies. This author concludes that The old hierarchies know how to use the new ones. So he advocates his point by talking about the major technology companies that exist today. And he concludes, this is a picture from the Google headquarters in Mountainville. And the author concludes that Metropolis is alive, it lives. So to wrap up, what I propose to newspapers today is that they should embrace technology. They should better understand how technologies work. They should become partners of information and brand communication, representing companies, entities, NGOs, groups, individuals, institutional issues, dreams, utopias, or frustrations by operating on networks. They shouldn't be seen as gurus of content or an advertising channel. They should take over this role of emitting thematic pheromones and engaging subscribers and those like Mesquita did in the beginning of the century. So they can connect this dynamic axis of a journalist coverage processes in the age of networks. They should combine tradition and reputation of a newspapers and use these new processes and disruptive and engaging products. They should value people. They are part of social networks, collaborators, stakeholders. They should be seen as assets of transformation through an editorial selection that basically states that adaptation, and evolution are crucial to the survival of newspapers. And they should also be articulate as curators. They should take the audience as partners. I respect newspapers, I hold them dear, and it's very fortunate that they exist. But in the crisis that we face, we realize the newsrooms have shrinked and they are a topic, they are basically focused on attention was just focused on elections on Brazil and the capital. So the president has just taken over, and we are already talking about the other elections in 2022. So I think that the press should react somehow. If it doesn't, well, even with this reaction, I don't know what is going to happen. Nobody does. Nobody knows how the new communication ecosystem is going to be in society. But newspapers play a significant role before the communities they are inserted in to ensure democracy. If we didn't have these media today, I don't know what would have happened in Brazil or in the US. The press still represents this role, but it is poorer in content and ignores the network. It doesn't see the network as a source of information and relationship. They believe that the network is just a system of distribution of news. And oftentimes it contributes best, it even contributes to the disinformation or misinformation and malinformation we have and fake news. Misinformation is the right information, but it gets into the network process and leads to confusion. Disinformation is a piece of information that is put and intended to create confusion and intended to create a specific narrative. Bolsonaro's social network, which is the only organized social network in Brazil, does that. It focuses on the system of distribution. Networks should have social networks focus on education, health, science, and technology instead of just fighting for the number of clicks they have on their website. They should follow a new system.
Que
Thank you very much, Rodrigo.
muito obrigado. Você fez aí
Thank
uma
you.
excelente súmula
You
da
made
história
a
do Estado de São
great
Paulo e, por
summary of the
consequência, da
history
história
of
da
Estado
imprensa
de São
brasileira
Paulo
e nos
newspaper
lança aí
and
enormes
consequently of the
desafios
Brazilian
para
press.
frente. E
and
mais
you
adiante
posed
você vai ter outra oportunidade de
challenges for us for the future.
sumarizar tudo
And
no
later
final
you
dos
have the
nossos
opportunity
debates.
of
E
summarizing
agora
everything
vamos então
after our
passar a
debate.
palavra para o
Now
professor
let's
Walter
turn
Bender,
over to
que
Professor
vai nos
Walter
dizer como é que estão as
Bender.
coisas
He is
lá
going
no
to tell us
MIT
how
Media Lab
things are at
atualmente.
MIT
Professor
Media Lab
Bender
today.
atua na área de publicação
Professor Bender
eletrônica, mídia e
works
tecnologia
in
de
electronic
aprendizagem
publication,
e é
media, and
firme defensor
learning
do uso de
technology. He's an
software
advocate
livre
for the
para
use of
processos de
free
aprendizagem.
software for learning
Professor Bender, o
processes.
senhor tem 10
Professor
minutos,
Bender,
por
you have
favor.
10 minutes.
Bom dia. So yesterday, Mr. Trump said he doesn't like Zoom. He's not going to participate in the next presidential debate because it's on Zoom. But I like Zoom. I'm here today, and thank you for the opportunity. Fake news. 220 years ago, we had fake news in the United States. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were in a very aggressive campaign for president. And John Adams and Thomas Jefferson both used the media, the news media, the print media, to publish fake news and attack each other. So fake news, at least in the United States, has a long history. And we still have fake news today, of course. But I recommend this book, American Aurora, if you're interested in a little of that history. So I want to move now to 40 years ago instead of 200 years ago and talk a little bit about some of the origins of the work on news in the future at MIT. So this work predates the Media Lab, but it's where I began my own work at MIT. And at the time, Jerome Wiesner, Nicholas Negroponte had this thesis of media convergence. They saw that the world of publishing, the world of computation, the world of broadcast were on a collision course. And they called that convergence being digital. It was really, what is the impact of the computation on media? How's it going to change how we think about how we communicate, how we form community? So my small part in all this was to develop a system for personalized news. And this is a system I developed beginning in 1980 called Newspeak. And it's really what today you would call Google News. You had mechanisms for being very explicit about the things you were interested in. You could also be implicit. What you were reading would seed the things you would get next by your expressing interest. It was social as well. So the things that my friends were reading would inform what I was reading. If a friend of mine would send me an email, that would impact my news feed. But also there was another component to it, which was professional media, professional journalism. So if it was important enough to be on the front page of the New York Times, the front page of Estudos, the front page of Photo, it would be in my news feed. So the idea was that it was a combination of many different editorial perspectives all brought together in one place. So this is sort of where we were 40 years ago. And then we began to look at some of the technology. This is really work beginning 30 years ago of this media migration, this migration from those three different areas, three different technologies, three different approaches into this digital world. So some of the work had to do just with again, the sort of the physical transformation from the printed word to the electronic word. E-ink, a technology developed by a colleague of mine, Joseph Jacobson, became the Kindle. And it really became sort of an efficient, low-cost way of getting what was traditionally ink on paper into an electronic form. CSS is sort of the underlying technology of the internet that makes the page be expressive. This was designed by a former student of mine, Håkon Lee. And this is actually a picture from outside of his office at CERN which is where he developed CSS. And he was inspired H1, H2, H3 by the size of the pipes outside of his office. But in addition to the physical migration, we also thought about the expressiveness of the new media. How can we express ideas in new ways using the new media? So colleagues like Muriel Cooper looked at expressive typography, for example. Are there ways of using the new media to tell the story differently? It's still a story, but we can maybe have some new modes of expression for that story. I worked on a technology to try to transform video into still images. So this is sort of an example of what that technology could do. Again, a new way of trying to tell the same story. I remember at the time I got a lot of pushback from the New York Times saying they would never ever publish a photo like this because they thought that it was some gross distortion of the news and people would be confused. And yet, I think today I've been vindicated. They use this type of imaging all the time. So the idea of both the transfer of the media and also the new expressive forms, new storytelling, was a lot of what we were working on 30 years ago. But more important, I think, is this project. This is, it's a little hard to tell what's going on here. This is a map of Boston. There's been a circle superimposed on top of it. This is a project about context. And a lot of what I'd been doing previously was getting the story I was interested in to the right person. How do we filter the news? The Estudo makes decisions every day about what's important enough to put on the front page. My news feed makes decisions what's most important to put on my front page. But this is a little bit different, this project. This is a project where what we're trying to do is we're trying to understand the context of the news. We're trying to understand how can we tell a story such that I'll actually understand the story. It's not just that this is important, but I want to make sure that I understand why it's important, that I can relate to the story. So what it does is it looks at whatever's happening and tries to translate that into contextual terms that I would understand. So for example, if I'm reading a story about Brazil and I'm from Boston, it's going to try to make connections between what I know about Boston and what I don't know about Brazil. So for example, the population of Boston is probably 50% greater than Salvador, maybe 50% less than Rio. So it can use that to contextualize whatever it's telling me about in Brazil. If there's a flood and 200,000 acres of farmland have been flooded, I don't know what that means. I know what each word means individually, but I don't know really what that means. But now what it can do is it can superimpose on a map of Boston what 250,000 acres actually means. Now I've got the context in which I can understand the story. So a lot of what we began to look at was not just filtering, but also putting things into context so that people could actually understand them and relate to them from their own perspective, from their own lives. A politician from Boston, from my hometown, once said, all politics is local. He was a national politician. He ran Congress, Tip O'Neill, but he was very, very cognizant of the fact that we all live in a place. We all have our very local communities. And humans will adapt any technology, any form of communication, however primitive, in order to communicate with each other. And so even, we might use something as crude and narrow and austere as WhatsApp, or we might use, a browser on a big screen. But anyway, we're going to try to communicate, and that communication is fundamentally local. It's all about who we talk with on a day-to-day basis to solve the problems in our communities, not just these vast global or national problems. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about another side of social media.
Finalmente,
We did a system, we call it silver stringers. Stringer is newspaper jargon for a freelance reporter, and silver for silver in the hair for the elderly. And we built a system to allow the elderly to publish newspapers. And we did this in the days before there was blogging. It was a sort of pre-blogging. And what we did, and I think the difference between this and blogging, is that the act of publishing itself, the act of participation in social media, was a socially motivated event. So rather than just each individual writing and hitting publish, they got together very much like you see a budget meeting in a newsroom, people getting together to discuss what's important, what do we want to cover, and you never, in the interface, was there ever a publish button. There was only a button to send what you were writing to an editor. So you couldn't unilaterally put your voice out there. You had to engage in a discussion with somebody. You had to have this social component to your communication before your communication went out into the world. And I think of all the things that's missing in today's communication, in social media today, is this notion that there really is a role for an editor. There really is a role for this dialogue between the writer and the editor, and that there really is this need to have that discussion in order to really refine the idea, refine the voice, and find the purpose of the communication. So
Thank you very. Okay, go ahead, Professor
okay.
Bender.
I'm just almost finished with my comments, so I'll try to get us back on schedule. So today marks the 35th anniversary of the Free Software Foundation. So Software Libre has been around now for 35 years, and it's had a great influence on my life, because Software Libre, free software, is not just about having things be open. It's not just open source, but it's also a license to do things. It gives you not just the freedom to look, but also the license to do. And I think as my colleague Seymour Papert often said, you learn through doing. And so having the license to be able to do is really, really important. And I think that what goes beyond the license is to have the scaffolding, the infrastructure, in order to support exercising that license. And I think that a lot of what is missing, a lot of the untapped potential, is that we haven't really provided the right scaffolding or sufficient scaffolding for the public in order to be expressive, but be expressive within the context of a process. Journalism is a process, and it's a well-established process that's evolved over hundreds of years. And that relationship between the writer and the editor is paramount to that process. And I think that, to me, what's going to make a difference going forward in the future of journalism is to somehow model that process and embed that process into social media. I think that really we're missing that component. And I think that that component is really how we move to a social media that's both open and forward-looking, as opposed to everyone in their closed little bubbles and quite destructive. So my message today is look to the future. And as we look to the future, think about what kinds of constructs, what kinds of tools, what kinds of modeling we can learn from traditional journalism, and use that to enhance the communication of everyone. So with that, I say thank you. And I thank you to the organizers, and particularly thank you to Rodrigo for giving me this opportunity to speak with you today.
Muito obrigado, Professor Bender. Muito
Thank you very much,
auspiciosa
Professor
a sua
Bender.
fala
Your
e
lecture
muito
was really
provocadora
very
essa
encouraging and
sua fala a
provocative.
respeito do futuro. Então, já
in
que
terms
nós
of what you said
vamos
about the
falar do
future.
futuro, vamos
And
agora
since we're
ouvir
going to
o
talk about the
futuro, que é a
future now,
nossa participante mais
let's
jovem desse grupo,
have
que é
our
a Bianca
youngest
Santana.
participant in our group,
Bianca, que
Bianca
apesar de tão
Santana.
jovem, já é doutora em Ciência da
Even though she's
Informação
very young,
pela
she
Escola de
has a
Comunicações e Artes da
PhD
Universidade
in
de São Paulo
information
e
science by the University
colaborou
of São Paulo,
para a
and she
articulação
has
da
also
Coalizão Negra
collaborated
por
for the
Direitos na
organization of
UniAfro
Black
Brasil
Coalition for
e
Rights
atualmente se
at
dedica à
UniAfro Brazil,
estruturação do
and
Instituto de
currently she's
Referência
dedicated
Negra
to
Peregun.
organizing the Black
Bianca, você
Reference
tem 10 minutos, por favor.
Institute. Bianca, you have 10 minutes, please. Thank you very much for the invitation. And also, thank you for saying that I'm young and saying that I represent the future. I'm honored with your comments. I would like to start by asking, based on Rodrigo's presentation, what news do we talk about? What is our public and what journalists are we talking about? Even though Luis Gama was mentioned by Rodrigo, and that was really very important, and that black men have really had some prestigious roles over the past centuries that has been scattered over time, and basically it has disappeared in the half of the 20th century and restarted in the early 20th century. In hegemonic journalism, black people do not exist as journalists, and they are not even considered as a public when we take into account the news or this communication environment. In the best of the worlds, they are usually part of the news and usually in the police section. Canedo works on the notion of genocide, and she explains clearly how Black people are not acknowledged as producer of knowledge, intellectuals, or journalists. What they produce is also not acknowledged as quality journalism. In the best hypothesis, they are object of a certain type of narrative about them. Unfortunately, this is what journalism has done throughout Brazilian history, and that not to make any international comparison. I could give you so many examples of how my body sometimes is not acknowledged as the body of a journalist, as a black person with a clear skin. I'm not very present in Brazilian citations. It doesn't have to do as the subject that takes a role, but the way we look at things that are considered as news, the way we analyze the mediatic environment. What about the internet? What about the social media processes? They're ambivalent. On one hand, we have women, black people, LGBT, and so many others are considered in the public sphere as never before in the past, but at the same time, they are not subjects that make the decisions, control the platforms. They do not have resources to potentiate their own narratives in this environment. These big techs reproduce discrimination and inequality that existed before them, be it in the structure, in the algorithms. And so, whenever I see an example of what the Western empires brought about as something that was in fact considered as an example or something positive, I'd like to remind you that this has to do with colonialism or slavery. And this is what we want, in fact, to discuss. And is this the model that we want to develop for journalism? I would also like to discuss the term polarization. Whenever I have a group of people who support Ustra, a torturer, and we place this guy in the trend topics of Twitter as it's happening nowadays, and we have a group of people who are questioning human rights, can we say that it is right to use the word polarization? I disagree. I don't think so. It doesn't mean that we have two groups or the equivalent of two groups with different ideologies, but some kind of civility parameter or collective pact. If they disagree and they have to discuss in equal conditions. But this is not the case here, and therefore I really liked Rodrigo's presentation and the possibility to discuss or to bring about these
Muito
topics
obrigado,
for you.
Bianca.
Thank you very much,
E eu
Bianca.
queria aqui relembrar ao público
I'd
que as
like to
perguntas
remind the
podem ser
public
enviadas para o
that the
endereço
questions
de e-mail
may be submitted to IEA
iaresponde@usp.br.
responding
Nós vamos
at
tentar fazer com que as
usp.br.
perguntas sejam
We
respondidas
will
ainda
try to have
durante a nossa
questions
sessão.
answered
Se
during
isso
our
não for
session,
possível por uma questão
and
de
if not
tempo, elas serão
possible because of a
enviadas
time
aos
issue, they
palestrantes
will be
para que eles
submitted to
respondam
the
depois.
speakers
Então,
so that they can
perguntas
answer them
para o
later,
e-mail
and therefore submit your questions to IEA
iea@usp.br.
responding at usp.br.
E da Bianca, nós vamos passar agora para uma
From
figura
Bianca, we're going to
histórica
move
na
on
internet
to
do Brasil,
a
extremamente
historical
admirado por
person
todos
in
nós que
Brazil's
praticamos a
internet.
comunicação,
Those
que
of
é
us who
o
work with
professor
communication
Demi
really admire
Guettico,
him.
engenheiro
And we are
eletricista
talking
formado
about
pela
Professor
Poli,
Demikekis,
USP,
an
mestre e doutor
electrician engineer
em
with a degree
engenharia,
by the University of São
conselheiro do
Paulo. He
Comitê Gestor da
has a
Internet do
master's
Brasil
degree
e
and a PhD
diretor-presidente do
degree,
Núcleo de
and
Informação e
he's director
Coordenação
president
do
of
ponto
the Coordination
BR,
and
NIC
Development
BR,
Center at
além de professor associado
and
da PUC.
ICBR, and
Professor,
he
a
also
palavra é sua
works
por 10
at the
minutos.
Pontifical Catholic University in São Paulo. Professor, you have 10 minutes. Well, thank you very much. It is an honor and a pleasure to participate in this meeting with such honorable colleagues, and also to see Professor Bender again, Dr. Cavallo, Rodrigo Mesquita. And so in my comments, and they go along the lines that I work with, which is the internet. It is essential for us to review the past. We would not be able to plan the future without a good basis of the past, even though the internet is very fast. We cannot say that things started today and that overnight things have changed or that we will change them. It doesn't work like that. And this is a view shared by Rodrigo and Professor Bender. We have to um, aim at the future. Whenever we talk about the internet, we have to be very careful when we differentiate the structures of the internet and the construct of the internet. I've heard a lot of people talking about this, and we're going to have a lot of questions. But I think that these things vary a lot. Second Life has disappeared, different processes, Davinian processes, and those who live in this world choose what we're going to do. But I read something in the internet, a poem by Quintana, where he says that they will be lagging in the past, and I will do too. So a lot of these things will be left in the past, and I will try to talk a little bit about polarization, as Rodrigo mentioned, and what was mentioned by our journalist in the area of polarization. There has been a massive entry of new users in the network, which is great. But of course, whenever you start talking, you are not always civilized or organized. And then Walter Bender's comment is really excellent in this regard. We should have, we should be able to break these bubbles and discuss these issues in a civilized manner. So, with the massive internet penetration, this was to be expected. It was expected to have the chaos and all of the mess we have now. Some people know how to use this, to make good use of this. We have to be patient, and we have beneficial effects, which are much more important. I'm always very optimistic, and I believe that the internet will improve things and will improve human beings. There's a sentence that was quoted by Rodrigo. He said, well, the internet shows a complicated world. You see horrible things in the internet, but the internet mirrors society. So whenever you see a mirror with bad things, of course, if you break the mirror, you will no longer see it, which doesn't mean that you have fixed things. The idea is for us not to break the mirror, to be able to see the good and the bad, and try to fix the very basis of all of this. The best way to do this is breaking the bubble and seeing where we're headed to. So, in trying to answer this question about polarization, I agree there is polarization. This was to be expected. Of course, whenever you want something really bad and you have it, sometimes you abuse a little bit. I'm hoping that we will overcome this phase and really make good use of what we have available and have an overall improvement of the community as a whole. Thank you very much.
Muitíssimo obrigado, professor, por essa
Thank you
mensagem
very much, Professor,
mais
for
realista, a meu ver,
this
não
more
otimista, mas mais
realistic view.
realista,
Not optimistic,
porque,
but
em
more
geral, a gente fica
realistic.
sempre,
In
eu entre
general,
eles, ficamos
it's
todos sempre
always
muito desanimados com os
very
problemas que a
discouraging
internet nos tem
to
trazido.
see the
Mas
problems brought
essa sua
about the
fala é
internet.
extremamente animadora e
Your
sábia.
words are very wise and
Já
encouraging.
ouvimos como é que estão as coisas
So
nos
we
Estados
already
Unidos com
know
o
how
professor Walter
things are in the
Bender,
United
e agora
States
vamos ver como é que
with
essa discussão está
Professor
se
Bender's
processando na
presentation, and now
Europa
let's see
com
how
a
this is going
intervenção
on in
da
Europe
jornalista
with the
Anistela de
intervention
Souza Pinto,
of
atualmente
Anistela de Souza
correspondente da
Pinto,
Folha na Europa, sediada em
currently a
Bruxelas.
correspondent of
A Ana
Folha in
Estela
Europe.
está na Folha de
She's
São Paulo desde
headquartered
1988,
in
exerceu diversos
Brussels. She
cargos lá,
has worked
inclusive de
with different
liderança. Ela é
positions.
mestre em
She's had leadership
administração
positions.
pela
She has a
FGV,
master degree
além de
in
ser
communication by
formada
FGV,
em
and she
agronomia.
also has
A
a
Anistela é
degree in
uma das
agronomy.
grandes
She
jornalistas
is
do Brasil
one
e vai nos
of the
trazer
most
a
important
visão dela
journalists in
sobre esse
Brazil and is
debate
going
na
to share
Europa.
her views on this debate in Europe with us. Thank you very much, Carlo, Rodrigo, and all of our colleagues. Good morning, everyone. In Rodrigo's presentation, something called my attention. He called it civilizatory flows, which goes against the barbarism. That's where the ability to survive lies for journalism. I'm now going to talk about Europe. So I thought about making a brief report on how the European Union sees this. Their experience is very interesting for two reasons. If the technology giants are the platforms and this is a process, we have to see these companies as part of a public communications structure. Public is the key word for them. You will never see any words of European legislator that do not mention the risk of these platforms to democracy. There is a German law of 2017 which determines that hate speeches should be removed. Also, the right of neighborhood, which are part of the authorship laws, and they have to pay for these news to those who have produced them. The consensus in the European Union is that the environment where these platforms work, regardless of being intermediated or not, the environment they work with is a public communication environment and not a private space. If it is public communication, it will affect democracy. I will make a brief comparison of what was determined by these models and other payment models proposed by Google and others. In terms of authorship rights in Europe, and yesterday actually they got a green light from the French legislators, we have to negotiate with journalism companies a payment form which is permanent and sustainable. That's different from the new showcase announced by Google a week ago, where there is payment, but that has to do with specific content in a temporary contract for 3 years, for example, in the case of the showcase. The Spanish law and the Australian law determine a disproportional power in the competition for resources that helped sustain traditional journalism. So we're no longer talking about paternalism or protectionism. They understand that when the financial health of these companies is fragile, democracy will also suffer. It was not like that from the very beginning. I gave an interview to Folha the other day, and Ricardo Campos, who is a law professor at Frankfurt University, he specializes in the use of law in the online world. In the short term, the feeling people had is that access to information had been democratized because everybody had access to free information whenever they wanted to. In the long run, what we know is that the quality of journalistic production will suffer an impact, the quality of journalism goes down, and pluralism also goes down. With that, we have an opportunity for barbarism, and that's something we feel in our lives on our day to day. To conclude, I said I was going to talk about Europe for two reasons. I have already mentioned the first one, and they are already tackling this in practice, implementing new regulations in the case of France or Spain. And then in Germany, they are also evaluating it. They disseminated a few days ago an impact assessment of this law of 2017, where they conclude that it did not affect the right of expression, which was a concern when it was implemented in 2017. The second reason I think that it's worthwhile looking at the European Union is that usually it establishes paradigms of regulation. Usually they are higher or they are more demanding, if you prefer to use that word. That's something that happens in the lack of formal rules. This is what some economists call um, an effect where the size is so big that it's worthwhile for different companies to use the standard imposed by the European Union. So, uh, because they will lead to lower costs. That's why some European rules are exported to the rest of the world in um, the health area, journalism, and other areas. The idea that platforms should compensate the deviations observed by paying for quality journalism should be scattered throughout the world and reach Brazil. It's not going to solve our problem immediately in terms of civilizatory information flows, as very well described by Mesquita, but it could help guarantee that we will have this available whenever we
Muito
find an
obrigado,
answer.
Anistela, pela sua
Thank you,
exposição e
Maristella,
pelas
for
informações que
your
você nos
words
traz sobre a
and
experiência
for the
europeia, que, como você
information that
ressalta,
you're
é tão
bringing about
importante para o
the
mundo todo.
European
Aliás, eu
experience.
quero
It's going
lembrar
to be
aqui que a
important to the
FENAGE
whole world.
lançou na semana passada uma
FENAGE
campanha
launched
para que o
last
mesmo
week a
tipo de
campaign
ação
so
que a
that the
França
same
está
type
tentando
of activities that
estabelecer no seu
France
país e outros
trying
países da
to
Europa também, como
establish
você
in its country
acaba
and
de
also
nos
in
mencionar,
other
também ocorra no
European
Brasil.
countries, as you
Então,
mentioned,
vamos ficar
they
atentos aí a
wanted
essa
that to
iniciativa da
happen in Brazil
FENAGE
too.
e
So
ver o que
let's pay attention
acontece.
to FENAGE's
E
initiative and
a
see what happens.
nossa última intervenção vai
Our
ser feita
last
pelo Caio Túlio
intervention is
Costa,
going to be
que é
made
uma
by
das
Caio
pessoas
Tulio
que mais
Costa.
conhece esse
He
tema
is one
tecnologia e
of
jornalismo,
the
tendo
people who
sido a
is
pessoa que
more
implantou
knowledgeable
os
in this
computadores na Folha de
topic,
São Paulo, por
technology and
exemplo, na década
journalism.
de
He
80,
implemented the use of
fundou e
computers
presidiu o
back in the
UOL
80s
logo
in
desde os
Folha de São
primórdios da
Paulo. He
internet no Brasil, é
presided
doutor em
WAL from its
comunicação pela Escola de
beginnings. He
Comunicações e
has a
Artes da USP,
PhD
fez um
on
período
communications from the
de
University of São
de
Paulo.
estudos de pós-doutorado
Also, he had his postdoc
na
studies
Universidade de
performed
Colômbia a
at the
respeito do
University
tema
of
e é o
Columbia
fundador da
on the same
Torabit,
topic,
uma
and he is
plataforma
the
de
founder of
monitoramento
Torabit,
digital
a
que tem
digital
operado
monitoring
desde
platform that
2017.
has been in
Caio
operation
Túlio, você
since
tem 10 minutos.
2017. Mr. Tulio, you have 10 minutes. Thank you, Carlos. It is a pleasure to be here. It is great to be able to listen to what you have to say, to listen what Rodrigo said, Mr. Bender, Bianca, Stella, and Demi Gashko. I do not disagree with anything that has been said so far, and I will try to add something related mainly to the future of journalism. The future of journalism should be based on a sustainable business model. Journalism has never faced the type of crisis it is facing today, and simultaneously as we have witnessed this year. Well, to make the best of my 10 minutes, I will restrict to myself to how we should embrace, how journalism should embrace technology and social networks in general. That is basically what Rodrigo said in his considerations and at the beginning of his talk. I'm not going to dwell into the past, but I'm just going to focus on the future. Everything leads us to believe that journalism, it is still under the domain of people with analog minds. That's a major problem when you think of technology. If you think of the Washington Post, for example, it was a newspaper with over 160 years, and it was sold by some millions of dollars um, to another group, and it was really purchased when it was in a very poor business situation. And also we had a brew that also was sent, it was sold with a lot of debt, and it basically was dismantled when compared to what it was the second largest media company in Brazil. That's what it was, just second to global. As to the future of journalism, there was a survey that I conducted at the University of Columbia, a research study actually in 2013. The traditional communication industry could be newspapers, could be journal, it could be journalism or television. It should reinvent itself. It's not just a matter of taking its old business model and take it into the digital world, because the value chain is completely different in the digital world. The communication and the software companies, the platforms, all of them have a little bit of the money. Well, actually, the platforms get most of it. Usually Google or Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. So they are not concerned in developing in terms of technology, because that would mean having a company with a much higher value, the level of value technology companies is, and also they would look for new investments from the market to allow them to invest in new software, to have a different approach to their narratives. And this is the only way they can survive. Otherwise, they will simply die. There is a battle, so to speak, a major generational dispute that we see today. This industry is looking, is expecting digital natives to be ahead of the processes, whether they are industrial, sales, journalistic processes of this industry. So it is not allowing itself to reinvent itself or to kind of kill the old companies and start it over again. Media companies should understand that in the past, this industry was a distribution industry. If you could not distribute your newspaper or your magazines or your TV signal, you would not be able to thrive. But today, managing the digital relationship with consumers is the strategic key. We should constantly and strongly invest in technology, and that means shareholders bringing money to the company to invest in technology. But it also entails convincing the market that this company will improve in terms of technology. And we should improve according to the spirit of a new times of digital natives. As Bianca said, we should stress out the discussions that she raised in terms of prejudice and racism. The world should review its structural racism position we see across the world. We need to tune in. We need to expand the number of services provided. In this research study, the solution we suggested were added value solutions. With that, newspapers will have not only the advertising revenue, because that's too small and widespread and it doesn't pay the bills, while Google and Facebook have over 60% of the advertising revenue. And based on what Anistela said, Google and Facebook are feeling the pressure to pay just a small bit to newspapers in along 3 years, and that will be nothing of their total net revenue. So it's like 0.02% of their network and revenue that is going to be distributed across different newspapers. So very briefly, I believe that these are the outcomes of these report of the research study after talking to the HDMI professionals in the US, also digital company professionals, professionals from New York Times, Washington Post, and especially Wall Street Journal, and also talking to those of Twitter, Facebook, and Google. They also agreed to discuss those topics. They are trying to tackle those issues, although started a little bit late. And as Anastella said, they started doing that by Google's showcase, where they use this $1 billion to journalistic companies that are part of that process. And because of that, they will not be allowed to sue Google at any times because of undue use of their content. That's it, Carlos Eduardo. I just wanted to be brief, but I think that that's the main message that I wanted to share with all of you. I would like to thank all of you for
Obrigado, Caio,
your
pela
inputs.
concisão e
Thank
precisão
you,
dos
Carlos,
seus
for being
comentários,
very
como sempre.
accurate and
Eu vou
brief in
encaminhar
your
aqui a
comments.
primeira pergunta que nós recebemos, uma das
We
primeiras perguntas,
received
para o
a
professor
question,
Demi,
and I would
porque
like
é
Professor
de
Demi
uma
Getchko
pessoa
to
que se
answer
chama
that.
Rui Miguel
It's a person
e
called
que
Rui
tem uma
Miguel who
visão,
asked this
como a
question.
maioria de nós, pelo
As
que eu vejo da
many of
pergunta
us, from
dele,
what I
é
see in his
preocupada
question,
com o
he's
futuro das
concerned
informações
with the
nesse nosso ambiente
future of
atual. O
information in
Miguel
our current
levanta a
environment.
seguinte questão.
So Miguel
Recentemente foi
raised
publicada a
this
pesquisa de
issue.
risco mundial da Lloyd's
Recently,
Register
Lloyd's
Foundation, em
Register's
parceria com o Instituto
Foundation
Gallup,
survey in a
que
partnership
foi
with
feita
Gallup
com
Institute was
150
published.
mil
It
pessoas,
involved
entrevistas
150,000
presenciais em
people
142
in
países,
face-to-face
e o
interviews
Rui
in
Miguel diz que
142
salta aos
countries.
olhos que
And Rui Miguel
71% dos
says that
pesquisados que usam a
71%
internet
of the
reconheceram pelo
interviewees
menos
who
dos
use
três
the
principais
internet
riscos,
recognize at least
a
one of the
questão
three
das
main
notícias
risks
falsas,
related to
acima
fake
de
news.
fraude e de cyberbullying. E ele
Even they
pergunta
recognize that
como
above
interpretar
fraud
esse
or
dado
cyberbullying.
face ao
So
foco que
how can we
empresas,
interpret the
redes
results of
sociais, em
this
especial
survey,
governos, têm feito
given
para
the
mitigar o
fact
problema?
that
Professor
companies
Demi, o
are
senhor
not
pode
doing
nos dar
much
aí
to
uma
mitigate this problem? Professor
injeção
Getchko,
de
could
otimismo para
you
nós e para o Rui
give us
Miguel?
some sort of optimistic message? Well, if 70% of people are concerned with fake news, means that 70% of people can recognize fake news. I once wrote a piece about that. Defense against fake news is natural. We should have antibodies against it. If we not support ourselves on someone to tell us that it's fake news, will just depend on some sort of tutorships. We should ourselves be able to detect fake news. This seems like a negative news, so 70% of people are concerned with fake news. But I think we can read this in a positive light. 70% of people are aware that they should be careful with the information they get. CGI and NICBR through CITIC also conducted a survey asking children, their parents, what are the risks of the internet? And parents, of course, find more risks, but children also acknowledge that there are risks. And children have a higher rate of risk detection on the internet than their parents. So this new generation is better prepared to recognize those dangers. So that's the positive aspect of this survey. So new generations will probably come with antibodies against fake news. Maybe we were more naive and it took us longer to detect some fake news. But as Mr. Bender said, fake news is not new. Lives have been told since the beginning of times. I think that we should find our individual defense, our antibodies against it. So I'm still very
Muito obrigado,
optimistic about it.
professora. A segunda
Thank
pergunta
you.
eu vou encaminhar para
Second
Bianca.
question, I
A
would like
pergunta foi
Bianca
feita pelo
Santana to answer
psicólogo
that.
e ex-profissional de
The
radiodifusão Rogério
psychologist
Luiz. O Rogério
Rogério
fala
Luiz is asking the
sobre o
question.
que
He used
ele
to work
chama de
for TV and radio
intimidação
too.
implícita
He's
que
called
os
about an
jornalistas
implicit
sofrem e
intimidation
ele
that
também
journalists
demonstra
suffer.
preocupação
He's also
de por
concerned
que o jornalismo não
on why
recebe mais
journalism
proteção,
does
jornalismo
not
e
get more
jornalista. Ele
protection,
até
both
diz que
journalism and
a
journalists.
importância da
He
imunidade, da
mentions the
circulação para os
importance of
jornalistas podia ser alguma coisa
immunity
como
or protection so that
oferecido aos
journalists
profissionais da
could
Cruz
just
Vermelha. E eu
walk
queria lembrar,
around like
inclusive, que
professionals from the
isso
Red Cross are
acontecia no
granted.
passado. No passado,
This
uma
happened
pessoa
in
que
the
usasse um
past. If
colete
you
escrito
had a
press, ela
vest
era
called press in
respeitada
the
pelos
past,
dois lados em
this
conflito em
person will be
qualquer
respected
situação
by both
de
sides of a
agressão mútua.
conflict
Hoje
in
em dia é o
any
contrário. Se
situation
alguém
of
se
aggression. But
identifica
today
com um
is the other way
colete
around. If
imprensa,
you
ela
put a vest
provavelmente vai
called
ser alvo dos
press
dois
with
lados em
a
conflito.
writing
Hoje em
press,
dia, a
probably
imprensa
they're
é
going to be
muito
target of
menos
both sides of the
protegida do que
conflict.
já foi no passado.
The
Bianca,
press
o que
staff is
fazer com
less
essa
protected than in the
intimidação
past. So,
implícita?
Bianca
Como é que os
Santana,
jornalistas podem
how can we
superar
deal and how
essa
can journalists
situação?
overcome this implicit problem, implicit intimidation? Thank you, Carlos, and thank you, Rogerio. This intimidation is not only implicit, it is explicit too, as Carlos mentioned. FENAGE has recently conducted a survey and realized that the main attacks against journalists in the past years come from the president's office. So in addition to the attacks from social media, from the coverage of protests, and we see that the press, people are suspicious of the press in those situations. But what's very severe in Brazil is that the Brazilian state that should protect journalists and protect freedom of speech and the press is the one that attacks journalists the most. Artigo 19 also made another assessment. Female journalists have been attacked more than 50 times by the president or his ministers. I myself was intimidated by the president. He accused myself of writing fake news after I wrote a text showing the relationship between the Bolsonaro family and the militia involved in the murder of Marielle Franco. But he accused me of something I never published. And then he apologized in another live meeting saying that he had made a mistake. The point is it is not about apologizing one journalist because of a mistake, because it's intentional. And it hasn't happened just in Brazil. This attempt of reducing the credibility of the press has been used by far right governments as a racist, fascist practice to reduce the reliability of the press, as if it was the same as the disinformation created by those groups. This is very serious, and we should organize ourselves. I am suing the president, and we need to do that collectively too. The Union of the Journalists in São Paulo, Reporters Without Frontiers, FENAGE, they have promoted several discussions about that, and also some uh, human rights associations, many NGOs that are doing that. They're engaged in this discussion. We need to organize ourselves to be able to fight this intimidation, which is explicit.
Obrigado, Bianca. Eu
Thank
vou
you,
passar para
Bianca.
o Caio Túlio a
Now I'll
pergunta do
turn
Carlos
to Caio
Navarro,
Tulio a question from
porque
Carlos
trata do
Navarro
futuro do jornal impresso.
about the
E o
future
Caio
of the
cuida
printed
desse
press.
assunto na prática e na
Caio
teoria
is
há muito
responsible
tempo.
for that
A pergunta é a
theoretically
seguinte,
and
Caio.
in practice for
Sobre o
quite some
futuro do
time.
jornal
So,
impresso,
what
é
about
consenso de
the
que precisa
printed press
mudar,
future?
precisa-se
I think it
mudar o
is
foco,
consensus that we need to
adaptar-se aos
change
novos
focus and
tempos e
adapt to
mídias.
new times and to
Ok,
new
mas
media.
objetivamente, o
But
que fazer
objectively
e
speaking,
como
what
fazer?
should we do
Pergunta o
and
Carlos
how should
Navarro.
we do it? That's the question from Mr. Navarro. I believe that the printed newspaper will survive as long as you still have people who read it, the older generation, ultimately. There's a very interesting study of Philip Mayer that back a few years showed he made an analysis since the 60s, and he realized in his study that when people reached an age when they went to the university or started working, they have to subscribe or buy newspapers because they were no longer living with their parents. But that trend was reduced over time, and the median he analyzed said that in 2043 we wouldn't have any more readers of printed press. Because of the internet, this became even more dramatic. The newspapers today are much smaller, and also even their ability of advertising, they're just a shadow of what they once were in the past. In a The New York Times Sunday edition was heavy, literally heavy in the 80s or in the 90s, 5 or 6 kilos. And the same was true for Estadão in Brazil for many years. So what we can still do is that while we'll still have a market, of course you should serve this market. But as you can see, there are even as many newsstands in the world. And while we still have people who like actually reading a paper newspaper, we'll still have it. But this market is uh, not even slightly similar in importance to what it once was. What we need to do, and again, I reinforce the message that we should invest in technology. We should invest in the creation of digital products, in products that respect the new way of getting knowledge. It changed. People do not get information the way we did. We from the analog generation who get information from the books. Now people get information from the internet, from TV series, from games, from browsing. That complements knowledge and that helps us acquiring knowledge. So this is why we need to develop technology, improve, and adapt newspapers to this new system. That's basically
Obrigado,
it.
Caio. A próxima
Thank you,
pergunta eu vou dirigir para
Caio.
a Ana Estela,
Next question
porque
is to
entre as
Ana
muitas
Stella.
experiências exitosas que ela teve na
Among
Folha,
her
uma
various
foi a de
successful
ter
experiences at the
implantado
Folha
o
newspaper, she
sistema de jornais
implemented
regionais da
the
Folha lá no
regional
começo dos
newspaper
anos 90.
system
A
in the
pergunta é de
early
Alexandre Carvalho
90s.
e é a
So we have
seguinte:
a
como
question from
pensar o
Alexandre
jornalismo
Carvalho.
regional
How can you think
sob essa
about regional
perspectiva de
journalism and the
ruptura dos
perspective
modelos
of
tradicionais?
disruption of
Ana Estela.
traditional models? Anastella? Well, let me correct something. I just followed the orders of Carlos Eduardo. He was the one who implemented that in the 90s. As amazing as it seems, one of the areas of journalism that benefited the most from the internet was local coverage, hyper local, I could say. Costs went down, and because of that, we could have a community based journalism that focused more on a more restricted audience. One interesting point that was raised in Europe recently because of the Belarus episode was that the protesters went to the street to protest against the fraud in re-election that re-elected the president for the sixth time. And very briefly, the population organized itself to establish their own information channels using messaging platforms, especially Telegram. That's what they use the most. So all of a sudden, the Belarus society just arise, and it was like mushrooms that just come up after the rain, and they created many channels that said, well, where are the police repression agents today, or the location. Also, they use these messaging platforms to share information, because the newspapers were uh, practically shut down, or they were edited. So I think that local and regional journalism, and following the optimism Professor Getchko, I think that local journalism can benefit from these changes in
Que
technology.
bom, Ana. Quem sabe a Folha volta a fazer jornais regionais, mesmo que não sejam impressos, se as coisas
We
andarem na
have
direção que
our
você está apontando.
regional
Eu vou passar a palavra
newspapers,
agora para o
and
Eugênio,
I'm
que tem
now
uma
going to turn
pergunta
over to
para o
Eugenie.
professor Walter
There
Bender.
is a
Eugênio.
question to Professor Walter Bender.
Eugênio, você está sem som.
Eugenie, you're muted. Very quickly. First of all, I would like to congratulate each and every one of you for the true lectures we had here today. They're wonderful. I have a question to Bender. I really enjoyed his presentation about the fake news concept. Fake news is a falsification of norm before we have fake content. And that is done by groups that are not professionals, and they're more or less in the dark. They published news that are untrue. They publish crimes, but within known publications with addresses, and they will have to respond for that. So in this regard, wouldn't it be inaccurate for us to say fake news for 200 years? Because we could say that we've had fake news for 1,000 years. There are lies out there, but the form of fake news seems to be very specific of platforms, digital technologies, and social network. And so my question goes along these lines. Wouldn't it be a little bit too much for us to say that we've had fake news for 200 years? And once again, I thank you all very much.
Professor Bender.
Professor Bender.
So I'm not sure I agree with you regarding making a distinction between fake news from non-professionals and fake news from professionals. At least in the United States, we've got some very prominent professional journalists who are lying to the public for their personal financial benefit or from some ideological perspective, but that's not uncommon from the professionals. But I think the solution to the fake news issue, and this was something that Demi brought up briefly in his comments, is education, is learning. I think that the way that we address this issue is to give people the experience and the understanding of news production, so they'll be better prepared to understand and have the context to understand and analyze what's true, what's false, what's in the gray and in between. We did a project with L'Espresso with La Repubblica in Italy, in Rome. And we set up a system across the entire country of Italy. Every single school in Italy had journalism programs for their children. So every single child in school in Italy was participating in the journalistic process, not just blogging, but participating in the process I was describing earlier in my comments. I think that approaches like that are the way to address fake news.
Muito obrigado, professor. A próxima pergunta é para o Rodrigo. E eu já
Thank you
vou
very much,
aproveitar,
Professor. The
fazer a
next
pergunta,
question
pedir
is
que ele
for
responda.
Rodrigo.
E como nós já estamos
I would like to
perto
ask
do
him to
horário
answer,
em que ele
and
deveria
because
começar os seus comentários
we
finais,
are
eu já vou
close
pedir
to
que ele
the time
engate
he should
e
make
já
his final comments,
faça as
I
suas
would kindly
conclusões
ask
para
him
a gente
to
depois
make
poder
his
encerrar
conclusions
esse
so that we
debate.
can wrap
A
up this
pergunta para o
debate.
Rodrigo veio do
The
Leão
question to
e ela
Rodrigo
diz o
comes from
seguinte:
Leo. He
entendo
says
que a
the
história de
following.
todos os meios de
I understand that the
comunicação
history of all
começa com
communication media
dispersão e percepção de democratização do papel do emissor e termina com broadcastização. O que te leva a crer que esse não seja o caminho das novas mídias digitais? Rodrigo, então você, por favor, responda essa pergunta e, se você quiser já engatar a terceira marcha aí e terminar, vá em frente.
Bom, primeiro eu agradeço aí a participação de todos, que eu acho que enriqueceu muito o debate, evidentemente. A minha visão específica é isso. Eu acho que o Júlio Mesquita, se ele tivesse nascido hoje, ele estaria trabalhando, se relacionando com a sociedade através de processos de rede social. Rede social, para mim, não é ferramenta, não é Twitter, são plataformas. Quer dizer, eu uso essas plataformas.
I use these platforms to try to be up to date with what is going on since the beginning. The Brazilian press publishes about that. I don't have 2,000 followers or anything. Just have less than 3,000. And this in universe, we have journalists from around the world discussing those topics. I think that the big techs dominate the internet, which is dominated by advertising. And this leads the discussion. It's not just about fake news. I think that good information ends up creating a lot of confusion. Ads sometimes privilege emotion. And this is why Bolsonaro's network is so successful, because it basically works with emotion, not reason or reflection. I don't know what it is the future of the press, of the printed press. I agree that journalism companies are led by analog minds and not digital minds. If I had had the opportunity, I would have worked since the beginning in this process. We are discussing health issues, infrastructure, education, security, all of that. But there are no processes involving mentorship to work on that. The coverage of newspapers today just restrict themselves to topics related to the capital, to politics in Brasilia. This is historic, I believe. And I share with you some of the processes we've had since the beginning and trying to have this connection with different segments of society. I'm afraid of the future to some extent. I think that all the topics that have been raised here are not going to be solved in the short term. I don't think that regulation is a solution. I think that companies that have this responsibility over information and they're responsible for traffic of information on the internet should have a public governance system, because They are of public interest to democracy. They have some power on the civic discussions that happen in society. We need to have another type of management of governance where the audience and the public has some sort of force of strength, that they are not the victims of that. We should be vigilant. The product is ourselves. So this is why we have some confusion today. And also the polarization process of the civic debate, also caused or mainly caused by the fact that we have ad technologies being the ones that dominate the universe. There was a document published for years, never seen it published though in Brazil. It was intended to journalists, which was the guide of advertisement technologies. It was intended for journalists. I'm not a scholar. I'm a journalist, but I'm also an entrepreneur. I got engaged in building the new Agência Estado, and then I spent 10 or 15 years working with major projects of connection of society through using the tools that we had available in the network. That's it. I would like to conclude by thanking you for this opportunity. I'd like to share a message. I'm 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 optimistic like Demi is in the mid and long run, but in the short term, in my lifetime and over 60, I think that we are going to witness a dramatic process. And I'm afraid of what the autocratic regimes can do. Well, I'm afraid a liberal democracy will go down into a reconstruction process that might take long, and maybe regimes like the Chinese or other autocracies, like is the example of Bolsonaro's uh, government, or even Lula, who's also an autocratic figure. I am afraid that those autocracies will rise to power and will have more importance than I wish they had. But in the long term, I hope the Avançados vision that was shared in Minas Gerais many years ago, and there's something I shared in the beginning, which was empowering the individuals and not large corporations. I hope that this vision will uh, be implemented, will come true. I believe that that will ultimately happen, but I don't think that I'm going to be alive to see that. Thank you very much. I'd like to also thank you for the opportunity of meeting some people I haven't met before. It was a great pleasure. Everyone's participation was great. I apologize. I am a very emotional person. I am not so concise. And I see that my history summarizes the history of my family. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado, Rodrigo. Muito
Thank you
obrigado.
very
Quero
much,
agradecer a
Rodrigo.
todos
I would
por
like
terem
to
cumprido o
thank
tempo. Eu não
everyone
precisei ficar
for
fazendo
sticking
o que
to
a
the
Susan Page
schedule.
fez
I did not
anteontem no
need to do what
debate dos
Susan Page
presidentes,
did 2 days
interrompendo
ago
e
during the
pedindo
debate
para que
and
parassem de falar
interrupting
os
people,
candidatos a
asking them to
vice-presidente.
stop
E eu
talking
vou
in the
devolver a palavra ao
vice
Eugênio,
president
que
candidate
foi o
debate.
cérebro
Now
por
I'll turn
trás
over
desse
back to
evento,
Eugênio
para que
Bucci,
ele
who's the
encerre a
mind master
sessão,
behind
faça os
this
comentários
event, so
finais
that
e,
he can make his
pessoalmente, eu queria
final
agradecer a
comments.
todos pela
Personally,
participação.
I would like
Muito
to thank
obrigado. Eugênio.
everyone for their participation. Carlos Eduardo, thank you very much. You are and have always been an elegant, effective, professional moderator, and who provides a very intelligent flow to our discussions. I am at awe with everything we've had today. I really amazed with what Bianca said and the bridge that we see between what she says and the experience of Rodrigo Mesquita. That gives us so much to think about that. I'm also loved what Anastella said by sharing her experience in Europe. That's an inspiration to us. I think it should be analyzed critically. And Estela has always been a very attentive journalist and ahead of her time. I'm very thankful to Demi Getchko, our prophet in the Silicon area, and also the governance on Silicon, and Caio Tulio, my guru for so many years. I would like to thank you very much. And I would like to thank Walter Bender that I've learned so much from you. He's speaking in English now.
Concept, please. I didn't mean to do that. I only was wondering about the nature of fake news because we have for sure many journalists that lies all the time, but they don't do fake news in my point of view. That's the difference. But you gave us a master class today in a few 10 minutes. It was fantastic. Thank you very much, Walter Bender. You are very welcome with us. I hope that this opportunity can be repeated very soon. Thank you very much. And eu agradeço a todos.
I would like to thank everyone once again. And I turn over back to Guilherme Plonsky, our leader. Thank you. I would like to second all the thanks made by Professor Bush. I'd like to thank everyone who participated in this debate. It was a pleasure to see some of you again, and it was a pleasure to meet the ones that I haven't met before. I would just like to mention that many of the aspects that were raised here are related to overall concerns that we have with a groups of topics in our, such as 5G. Some of them are just starting to be discussed. And we have a group that works with the computational skills. It's not even called digital anymore because quantical computing is included. That is going to lead to something interesting. Personally, I would like to say that I get inputs about the topics that have been addressed. Inclusion, for example, this has been widely discussed. And I get these inputs not only focused specifically on the Oscar Sala discipline that we are launching, but also this encourages so that in the Institute of Advanced Studies, we can focus our work and broaden our work to reach other areas that we haven't contemplated yet. So on behalf of IEA and also on behalf of our partners CGI and NIC-BR, I would like to thank everyone who participated in this debate. I would like to thank Rodrigo, who not only was the main speaker, but also about his great testimonial. And when I was inviting our guests, Rodrigo also contributed so that everyone would say yes to our invitation. I would like to thank Carlos for being the moderator. I think his moderation was very sensible. I think he added value every time he would turn over to someone else. So thank to all the panelists and to the IEA staff who provided support for putting together this event. They allowed us to be here together. I hope that soon we can meet again in person and in a 3D interaction, and we can see how we can include include Anna, who's in Brussels, and Professor Bender, who's in MIT. Let's see if we can do that. Maybe teletransportation, why not? I wish you a good weekend. I wish health to everyone. And I don't want to be optimistic in the sense that everything is going to be turned out just fine. But on one hand, I agree with what the me mentioned. We need to be optimistic, otherwise we couldn't even be here. But there are risks in this environment where we live in journalism. Those are some of our life risks, life-threatening risks. I am the son of immigrants who came to Brazil in the 30s for reasons I don't even need to explain. So I see significant risks. I hope that we can develop with you. I hope we can develop antidotes in time. Antidotes that will allow society to deal with toxic fumes that spread sometimes in an uncontrolled way. I would like to thank each and every one of you. And again, I wish you health, happiness, and I hope we can meet soon.